within a few minutes of having completed it, he came to me and he said, look at this. And Richard had a swelling on the back of his head. Now, he had that swelling simply through the power of hypnosis. I hadn't suggested he had the swelling, but it had been part and parcel of the experience. Hi, and welcome to Ask Mark Anything. And I'm here in France with my cup of coffee because very occasionally I wake up at 3 a.m. and I just have to write something. It's sort of creative urge. And this morning was one of those mornings where I sort of woke up and I had to write a blog, and I spent several hours on that. So if I look a bit jaded, then that's why I'll try to be as vivacious and eloquent as possible. So I'll try and get through as many questions as I possibly can. If your question doesn't come up, it's not because it wasn't good enough or anything like that. Don't take it personally. It might well be because I've had such a deluge of questions come in that I just haven't been able to get round to it. Right, so the first question is from Angela. And Angela asks me, what was your first big convincer for hypnosis? What happened to make you absolutely sure that hypnosis is powerful? And that's a great question. I learnt hypnosis back in 1993, and from very early on I was working with the public, volunteers on the course that I was training on. Very good course, British Hypnosis Research, and I was straight away using hypnotic phenomena such as arm levitation, eyelid catalepsy, arm catalepsy, anesthesia, and that sort of thing. And that to me was hugely convincing. But I have to say, I felt I was pretty naturally good at hypnotizing other people, and in part because I had young children at the time and I was used to telling them stories and talking in a sort of lulling way to them and so forth. So I think that may have helped. I was quite good at that, but I felt I hadn't really experienced hypnosis for myself. And I started to wonder and worry whether perhaps I just wasn't a good hypnotic subject, And as is so often the way, when you mull something over, when you try to solve a problem consciously, your unconscious mind is working on it below the surface. And I hadn't been thinking about it consciously for a while, but it's obviously been in the back of my mind. And one hot summer day, I had a snooze during the day, and I spontaneously went into the most profound hypnotic trance. And it's as if my unconscious mind was saying, this is what you've been looking for. Now, once you've understood this from the inside, you can move on and forget about it. So I had hand levitation, arm catalepsy. I tasted foods that weren't there. I gave myself the message next time I was in the gym, I'd break personal records, that I'd start sleeping better. And I had all kinds of profound hypnotic experiences. And then I came out of the hypnotic trance, which I guess was a self-hypnotic trance, of course, because no one else was there, but I hadn't intentionally gone into hypnosis. Now it was almost as if nature was saying to me, okay, Mark, you need to understand how powerful this is. And it's not just other people play acting or pretending to get better and so forth. So that for me was a huge convincer. But along the way, certainly treating people for phobias, perhaps lifelong phobias in some cases, or almost lifelong, and post-traumatic stress disorders, which have seemed intractable, and for conditions which medicine didn't seem to be able to help so well, sort of blew me away in the early days, because I've been working in a psychiatric hospital as an auxiliary nurse, and I was used to people being treated with medication or not really being treated at all, but just contained, and to find that you could actually affect quite powerful changes within people purely by the way that you communicate with them and tapping into their unconscious resources was a wonderful revelation and epiphany for me. There was another time where I I ran workshops for 14 years around the UK, and we were sort of teaching basic hypnosis skills to members of the public, and eventually a diploma as well if they wanted to go on to do that. And on the second day, I'd always demonstrate the rewind technique, which is a technique for lifting traumas and phobias. Now, one guy called Richard, who went on to work with me for a while, he, Australian guy, he wanted to give blood, for ethical reasons. But last time he tried to give blood, he was terrified of needles, and he'd sort of felt faint, and he'd fallen back and banged his head and hadn't been able to give blood. Okay, but he wanted to sort that out, so come along, and he volunteered. So part of the rewind technique is dealing with the worst memories of that fear, so that they no longer bother a person. And so we worked on that specific memory of him fainting and banging his head, and so forth. Now, after the rewind, he suddenly felt that he no longer feared needles, and he'd be fine with them, and indeed he was. He went on to give blood, which is what he wanted to do regularly. But he, within a few minutes of having completed it, he came to me and he said, look at this. And Richard had a swelling on the back of his head. Now, he had that swelling simply through the power of hypnosis. I hadn't suggested he had the swelling, but it had been part and parcel of the experience. Now, that's very rare, but it just showed me the power of hypnosis. Now, I re-hypnotized him. He was an extremely good hypnotic subject, as you'd imagine. And within a few minutes, the swelling, I suggested the swelling go down immediately, and it did within about 5 minutes. So that showed me the immediate power of hypnosis to affect the body. So that was another huge convincer for me, although I'd been practicing hypnosis for a number of years by that time. But so many incidents like that, some that I'd forgotten, that reinforce the mystery but also the power of hypnosis. So thanks for that question. Moving on, Diane asks, what are your recommendations for helping to overcome self-sabotage, which manifests as procrastination, poor discipline, avoidance, and lack of confidence? Or are those things causing self-sabotage? Chicken and egg. But certainly self-sabotage can be precipitated or caused, I guess, by a fear of failure or a fear of success, which are really two sides of the same coin. So we might fear to try, because if you don't try, then you haven't failed. So for some people, the worst thing is to fail. That's the very worst thing that can happen to them, and to be humiliated. People talk about being humiliated. Well, what if you were humiliation proof? You just didn't get humiliated. Okay, so you didn't mind failing, or you even invited it. So there's a thought. And the other side of the coin would be fear of success. For some people, the familiar is comfortable, much more comfortable than the unfamiliar. And the familiar might be failure in their terms, or it might be not rising above the parapet. Sometimes that might be because we've swallowed suggestions from other people in our lives. You'll never amount to anything, or you'll never be any good. That can work through emotional conditioning. If someone's highly emotional, then they become more suggestible. So the way to implant a belief in somebody, inculcate a belief, rather than teach them a bit of knowledge, is to get them highly emotional and then ply them with suggestions. So if someone's being beaten around the head whilst being told they're no good, or they're the worst person in the world or whatever, then those suggestions are more likely to hypnotically embed within the person. Okay, so that's one way someone could have a fear of success and or failure instilled within them. Another way might be a sort of a misguided loyalty. People don't like to. I had one client whose father had been very abusive to him, who was now dead, and this client said that he'd never been able to feel that he could earn money, or more money than his father had earned, and his father had never earned much money during his life. And we really worked on him sort of rebelling, In order to not self-sabotage, sometimes we have to get rebellious. Rebelliousness is often associated with adolescence, but sometimes later in life we need to rebel against the people who manipulated us earlier on in life, who fastened down a premature label or limitation on who we are and what we're capable of. So do you need to rebel against somebody or something? Okay, that limitation that's been applied to you. Now, this is an important question to ask. I think your question, Diane, about procrastination. So procrastination and poor self-discipline could certainly become a habit. Discipline is a habit, and poor discipline is also a habit. So breaking that habit is important. Just doing one or two things a day which you'd rather not do, but kind of need doing, to start with. So just starting to break through that habit quite purposefully. And they can be caused by fear of failure or fear of success. This is a bit scary, so I won't try it yet. Okay, so certainly listening, if your question is about specific audio downloads, certainly listening to the Stop Self-Procrastination download and the Stop Self-Sabotage downloads would be useful for you. But yes, I think that's what's going on with people when they're self-sabotage. So that behind that is a fear of success or failure, and both things can be working within the same individual, I think. So ascertaining what is it, what am I afraid of, and also starting to see life as not success or failure, but rather opportunities to create stories. If you don't do anything, you don't have any stories to tell. Whereas if you try something and you fail spectacularly, maybe it'll be a funny story to tell at some point, or you've learned something, or because of failure in one area, you suddenly see that there's an opportunity in another area, and so forth. So widening our definitions of success and failure can be important. A relative failure could be a success in another way because you've met someone that you wouldn't have met otherwise, or and so on. Life is multifaceted and interconnected in that way. Okay, Brian asks, my son who's 12 has real issues with emotional regulation. He refuses to talk to counsellors, and I'm struggling to get him to listen to your child packs, our hypnosis downloads audio packs for children. Any advice that can help, please? Okay, Brian, and thanks for that. And certainly poor self-regulation, emotional regulation needs to be tackled. We know that people who can learn to control their outbursts, who can delay gratification, who can compartmentalize emotional difficulties, tend to not only be happier and live longer, but be more successful as well, and have better relationships. So it's certainly important to be able to do this. Now, the problem with trying to get someone to do something for their own good is that the more you push them, the more they pull in the other direction, especially if they're strong-willed. Okay, so we see this, the more you're supposed not to eat that cream cake, or teenage girl is supposed not to go out with the attractive but edgy problematic boyfriend, and the more you tell her not to, the more she wants to. The sort of rubber band effect. You pull one way and the pressure builds and it snaps back the other. And really you're trying to get someone to do something because you're motivated for them to do it, but they're not motivated. So how might we motivate your son to deal with this? Now, quite often people only become prepared to deal with something about themselves when it becomes such a powerful problem for them. So someone's coughing their guts up, so now it's time to stop smoking. Doesn't always work. I had a smoker come to see me with an iron lung, not an iron lung, an oxygen tank, not an iron lung, an oxygen tank, a mobile oxygen tank, and said that the smoking wasn't affecting his health. So there is a denial as well. But how we can help people begin to be motivated to improve themselves in some ways is partially through externalizing the problem. So, for example, with a smoker, okay, since I was talking about that, we might say, how does that smoking convince you that it's an integral part of your life? You know, what messages does it give you? Okay. You know, what has it stolen from you, or what does it threaten to steal from you? Okay, and is the deal worth it? The deal with the smoking, you know. So you get something to do with your hands and a little bit of pleasure, but it gets maybe 10 years of human life. Okay, it might get your youthfulness, your fertility, your eyesight, your skin elasticity. You know, it gets a lot from the deal. So carry on smoking if you feel the deal's worth it, but it might not be. So we're externalizing it. We're now describing the smoking as an interloper, as not core to their central identity. So how does that, I don't know what this emotional dysregulation manifests as in your son, but you know, if it was anger, for example, or rages and so forth, you know, how does that anger punish you? How does it spoil things for you? Okay, how would you stand up to it? If it was a person, what would it be like? This is perhaps what stories are about. You know, if we take a traditional story, it might be not so much different characters as different individuals, but different components of one individual. So we all have the wicked witch inside us, we all have the ogre, we all have the hero or the heroine. Okay, we all have these parts to us. So, you know, beginning, and not in an obvious way, not saying to your son, for example, well, you can look at it like this, that it's outside of yourself and the impulsivity is not really you, and there's another bit of you. You know, you can just occasionally start to drop in, how did that anger make you do that? You know, when he's calm, not when he's angry. For example, if he gets angry, you know, how would you stand up to that? Okay, so we're by the way we communicate, we're embedding the idea that you are not the anger, but we're not being so crass as just to say you are not your anger, like a cliche. Okay, we're beginning to separate the person from the core identity of the person from the problematic pattern. So they're here, and they start to see it over there. So, you know, and again, with the smoking, you know, I don't want to sit there opposite a smoker or an alcoholic, and it's me against them and the smoking. I want it to be me and them against the smoking over here, okay, or me and them against the anger over here, and then they start to separate from the pattern. So that would be one way of just talking to him. You know, how does it push you around? What's it stolen from you? What might it steal from you in the future? You know, how would a person, or how would you stand up to that? Okay, so it's just a few ideas. I mean, I know it's not that in depth here because I've got limited time, but it's just an idea, just a way of looking at it, which might be a little bit different. Okay, Nick asks me, what is the most amazing thing you've seen happen with hypnosis? So this is a bit like the first question. And also the most impressive healing. Okay, well, as I said, it was very dramatic when this guy actually produced a hypnotic swelling on his head. Well, not very useful, but very indicative of the power of hypnosis. I have certainly affected cures of people suffering from warts. I mean, I guess you're talking here about physical cures for things rather than curing a phobia or post-traumatic stress disorder and that kind of thing. I did work with a woman, and I'm very loath to talk about hypnosis as a cure for cancer, you know, because I don't want to sit here sort of claiming that I can cure cancer with hypnosis, and I certainly don't want to suggest that someone should forgo all mainstream medical treatment and just, you know, give all that up and just do hypnosis. But as an adjunct to other treatment, then perhaps hypnosis can be very useful. And I was working with a woman on Zoom for a few years, and she had cancer. Before I met her, she had cancer, and it was in the breast, and it had metastasized to her pancreas and her bones, and eventually her brain. And she was given, when I first met her, I think she was given about 3 months to live. Okay, and she wanted to see whether I could extend her life, and by using hypnosis. So I worked with her perhaps a couple of times a week, and she started to feel a bit better, and I made suggestions for white knights, being the killer T cells that attack cancer cells and so forth, and she'd visualize these hordes of white knights in her body attacking the cancer and so forth, and the cancer sort of shrank sometimes. Now I don't know whether that's coincidental. Okay, it may have been the other treatment she was getting, but she lived for many years after I first met her, and lived pretty well as well. She did eventually die after about 6 years. But she told me that she'd become a sort of medical marvel. She was in the States, and her doctors would point her out to other doctors, saying, we just don't understand why she's still around and why she's still comparatively healthy. Okay, so that to me was quite amazing and incredible, but it may have just been sort of coincidence. Okay, there are other sometimes surprising or curious aspects to hypnosis I've found. One of which is, and again, I do like to talk about research, and I don't like to be too speculative and or too wacky, woo-woo-ish. But I have found that sometimes that does seem to be a sort of mind-reading element to hypnosis, whereby perhaps something to do with the state, you seem to be reading the thoughts of the person that you're hypnotizing. Now that again may be coincidence, or suggestibility working on me as well as them, but that does seem to be something that occurs sometimes, and I would imagine that anybody who uses hypnosis regularly will have something of that happening, or at least seem to be happening. So that can be quite incredible as well, and lots of other physical sort of cures, and Parkinsonian shaking as well. I've worked with to good effect. Usually not curing stuff like that, but actually making it much more manageable for the person, so that they can get some control over it and that kind of thing. Okay, Anne asks me, what hypnosis tapes improve memory retention? That's a good question. And we have got a couple of memory-related audio sessions, like Remember What You've Read and Present Without Notes, okay, which I always try to do when I'm giving a public presentation. And we have an upcoming session for May called Improve Your Memory. So that answers your question. That will be out in May. Okay, so watch this space. The next question is, hi Mark, is hypnotherapy basically mind over matter? Thank you. I'm not sure who that's from. So is hypnotherapy basically mind over matter? And again, without wanting to get too mystical about it, some people do argue that mind and matter are part of the same continuum, and that perhaps mind preceded matter. And we're used to thinking that matter was produced in the universe after the Big Bang, or the creation, and then human beings came after. But could there be consciousness before human beings? Could consciousness have been the original impulse for the physicality of the universe around us? So that's a possibility, but it doesn't really help us, and no one can prove that. But certainly hypnotherapy or hypnosis influences matter. And I don't mean that you can necessarily do telekinesis and make a concrete pillar sort of move, or my cup on the desk. That's a good idea. Reminded myself. Move by itself. But if you can influence the body, the working of the body, then you are influencing matter. So mind over matter would be you lifting your leg or standing up. That you have an idea in your mind, an intention, and that manifests in a physical effect. If you slap your hand on the desk, then matter has been affected by what your mind's doing. So it's intrinsic to everyday life that we're influencing matter with our mind, and also, of course, the mind is influenced by matter. If you are ill, then that will affect the way your mind functions as well. Or if you're very tired, or if you got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to write a blog, as I did, then that will affect your mind. Certainly the biology of the psychobiology of mind-body healing is fascinating, and we don't really know the extent of the potential of the mind to influence the body. It could be much greater than we realize. Certainly placebo is immensely powerful. That people who believe they're being exposed to something they're allergic to come out in an allergic reaction, and people who believe they're not being exposed to something they are allergic to when they're really being exposed to it don't always come out in an allergic reaction. Now, it's not to say that it's all in the mind. If I get burnt, it's not because I had the wrong attitude, but the power of the mind to influence the body is incredible, and we shouldn't ever sort of dismiss that. Okay. Next question is, how can we help people struggling to improve their English using hypnotherapy? Well, I would say certainly practicing English and learning English in the sort of traditional way is a very useful thing to do. But how do we practice? And one way to practice is to just get out there and do it. I mean, I'm currently in France. My French is still a little bit schoolboyish. But I do find that they appreciate if you make the attempt and don't just assume that everyone speaks English. So I will try to speak French, and you need a certain amount of confidence, and you need to be prepared to fail, to fall on your face, so to speak, metaphorically. So using hypnotherapy to hypnosis to envisage speaking language. We do have a learning language audio session, but yeah, just rehearsal, hypnotic rehearsal of speaking, of being fluent, of understanding, and so forth, and actually trying. Some people are afraid to try to speak in a foreign language, and I think as long as you try, then it will improve. And of course, expose yourself to as many native speakers as possible and spend time with them. Okay. Next question is, when I'm playing a competition tennis match, I get very tense and edgy and get very upset with my game. Is there anything you can suggest to help? Right. Okay. Well, I too play tennis after a fashion, and I do find that you can get so involved, and the thing, there's not much room for error with tennis. So a couple of centimeters too low and it goes into the net, 2 centimeters too wide and it's out. And you have to be precise, and the more upset you get with yourself, the less precise you get, and more wild it gets, and like with many things in life. There are sort of mind games that I tend to play with myself when I'm playing tennis. So, for example, I might say I was 5-1 up in the first set, and then the person comes back and now I'm 5-4 up. So they've crept up, and they're nearly. I might then tell myself that they were 4-1 up, and now I'm 5-4 up. So I've done well, sort of, rather than beating yourself up. Just sort of. I mean, you kind of know it's not true, but doing that sort of thing, I find really effective. Again, when you find yourself getting angry and irritable, then really we're going into the sympathetic nervous response, the fight or flight response, you're fighting sort of thing, getting angry. And, you need to think about breathing as well. Now, deep breathing is interesting. It's not just a question of breathing deeply, but extending the out breath. So when you breathe in, then if you just breathe in and don't breathe out, that's what you do when you're running or fighting or fleeing. But also when you're panicking. Okay, so people who panic tend to, if I do that too much, I'll start panicking. But they tend to just breathe in at the expense of breathing out. When you sigh, people sigh when they're tired or when they're stressed. It's nature's way of putting the switch of or pushing the switch of relaxation. So breathing out for longer than you breathe in. So when you find yourself getting anxious and tense when you're playing tennis, just breathe into the count of 5, out to the count of 7, hold it. Okay, breathe into the count of 5, out to the slower count of 7. So it's out breath that calms you down, and that's something you can do in the moment when you're playing tennis. Okay, and okay. I need to practice that on myself when I'm playing tennis. Okay, what have we got here? Hi Mark, we are usually recommended to listen to our downloads daily for a week, then as and when needed thereafter. However, I understand that you do not give your own clients recordings of the hypnotic part of your private sessions, whereas a number of other hypnotherapists do this. I just wondered why the different approaches to the most awesome therapy. Thanks for reading. So yes, I mean, I know that plenty of hypnotherapists do recordings for their clients, and certainly if a client asks me to, then I'll record for them. But the reason I don't do that is because I tend to work quite intuitively with a client. So I don't want them necessarily picking apart the work I've done afterwards. It's an interesting thing that amnesia can be a therapeutic tool. And I don't mean that the information isn't there at all, that what you've said to a client, but we don't necessarily want it conscious, okay? Because work can be picked apart, so you might tell a story. For example, I work with a young woman who got extremely anxious socially, and would get really upset at work with a particular person as well. And I told her a story which involved a wise old owl flying over the animal kingdom, and she found that that afterwards she didn't have a memory of that. She didn't seem to have a memory of that story because it was embedded within lots of other hypnotic work that we did. But a couple of weeks later, when she came back again, she said she'd been really calm at work and feeling much better socially and so forth, and that curiously enough she'd get a sort of image for a couple of seconds in her mind of a beautiful old wise owl in her mind. And she said, I don't know why, I've got no idea. And I just I said, oh, that's curious. And that was it. But had she picked over the story, what does this mean, why did he tell me that, and so forth, it might not have had the dynamic power. We want something to work within somebody, and on an unconscious level sometimes. So that might be why I wouldn't necessarily have a recording for a person. But having said that, oftentimes it wouldn't be a problem. I don't, in principle, have a problem with anyone doing that. Of course, it's up to them. But personally, I find that I prefer not to do that, and I like to treat every session with the person in a kind of fresh, kind of a way, not picked over by the unconscious mind. It's a bit like the old story of the scientifically minded boy and the fly, and this scientifically minded or psychopathic boy picks apart a live fly, and he finds he's got legs and the body and the head and the wings, but he doesn't know where the fly's gone. And that can be true for all kinds of things, but also therapy as well. Okay, another question here: is it okay to do 3 times a day to do 3 times a day? To do what 3 times a day? Or is that too much? Presumably listening to audio sessions. Also, will doing audios for 10 weeks, 70 days create permanent effects? Thank you in advance. I mean, you can have too much of a good thing, and I would say once a day. I'm talking about hypnosis here. Would certainly be requisite. Some people go overboard and they think more is better. One paracetamol will cure my headache. Sort of 100 must be 100 times better. And obviously there's proportion to everything. But I think once a day would be absolutely fine. For one audio session. As regards the part about 10 weeks, would that create permanent effects? It certainly should do. Yes. I mean, if it's working for you, then it should work pretty quickly, and sometimes we get a permanent effect after one session, so you shouldn't discount the possibility of that. But there's no magic sort of thing about 10 weeks particularly, but yes, certainly the changes should be permanent. But sometimes people worry that it'll go back, things will change and then they'll go back. But really what your mind and body is searching for is equilibrium, and part of equilibrium is finding a better way of doing something. So it's a better way of doing something. It's more economical for the mind-body system, as far as energy is concerned, to feel calm socially than it is to panic. Okay. Now, someone can have a traumatic experience after learning to be calm socially and find that sets them back and so forth. But generally speaking, changes should stick. Okay. Okay, the next question is, and I'll just take a sip of coffee. You're going to love this. Who was I in my past life? I don't know who this is from. It could be Julius Caesar, but I don't know. And I don't know. I don't know who you were, and I think this may be a tongue-in-cheek question. But it, I can talk a little bit about the idea of reincarnation as it's connected in the public imagination to hypnosis. The idea that you could access a past life through hypnosis, and there are past life practitioners, I know that, and so forth. I tend to try to use hypnosis in ways. I know I've talked some airy-fairy stuff about psychic connection and all that, and mind and matter, but maybe not airy-fairy, but slightly out there. But I tend to stick to what I know and what I can be validated scientifically as far as possible with hypnosis, with research. But plenty of people believe in past lives. The idea of the regeneration of the soul once you physically die into another physical being or body, and then you have amnesia for the life before. Do I believe in this? I don't know. I'm agnostic as far as reincarnation is concerned. I mean, I know when I was very young, I have memories of having had memories of existing before I was born. Now, I know that sounds very, very strange, and I couldn't tell you what those memories are now. But it was very distinct. Now that could be something to do with neurobiology. It's not evidence of anything. It's a subjective experience. There have been cases apparently of people having known more than they should have known at a very young age about the life of someone who died as they were being born, and things like that. Is that reincarnation? I don't know. Or is that somehow the mind bypassing the usual perceived limitations of the mind and body? I don't know. But I don't know who you were in your past life, if you were anyone at all. Usually someone was someone very famous, Cleopatra or Julius Caesar or Napoleon. Not usually Hitler, or not usually just a sort of cleaner and so forth. Okay, but usually someone highly significant. The jury's out on that, who you were in a past life. Okay, hi Mark, I regularly fall asleep during my sessions and don't consciously recall much of the content. Will it still be effective? And that's interesting. Hypnosis comes from the Greek word hypnos, which is the Greek god of sleep. And they used to have sleep temples in ancient Greece, where the religious, sort of mystical patterns and methods were practiced, probably using sort of hypnotic-like methods. But hypnosis isn't really the same as sleep. Now, you might be falling asleep, or you might just be going into a deep REM state. Okay, so if we think about the REM state, it's very similar to hypnosis in many ways, but REM state, rapid eye movement, when your eyes are sort of doing that, is different from other parts of sleep. So if you're going into slow wave sleep, then the hypnosis is less likely to be effective, and it'll take much longer to come around and wake up. If you're just going into REM sleep, then this is called paradoxical sleep. And the reason REM sleep is called paradoxical sleep is because during the dream stage of sleep, your blood pressure is similar to how it is when you're awake. Your brain wave patterns are very similar to waking brain wave patterns. So it's not a relaxed part of sleep, okay? Which is why people who overdream wake up exhausted. Depressed people tend to overdream and wake up very tired. Even though they've been asleep, they don't feel rested by the sleep, because it's composition of sleep that's important, not just quantity of sleep, it's the quality. We need enough slow wave recuperative sleep versus the REM sleep. So, if you're going into REM sleep and dreaming and you come around quite easily if someone calls your name, then it will be having an effect, even if you don't remember much about it. If you think about the REM state, now what happens in the REM? Your eyelids do this. Now sometimes we see this in a hypnotized subject. The eyelids are sort of going side to side as they visualize. And indeed the old watch swinging method of hypnotizing somebody was a way of perhaps artificially getting the REM state going. Okay. Another way of getting the REM state going is through shock, or, tipping someone back on a stage show and that kind of thing. But I don't tend to do that with clients. Then the other connection with the dream state is, of course, an active imagination that feels very real, which can occur during dreaming and hypnosis. Catalepsy, your body becomes very still when you dream, and your anti-gravity muscles are inhibited of movement, because nature doesn't want you actually trying to fly out of the window if you're dreaming that you're Superman. There's an open window, so you'll flicker, you'll do minimal movements during sleep, dream sleep, but you won't move around. When you're moving around more, it's actually in the deeper levels of sleep. Okay, so there are these parallels. The REM state is the commonality between hypnosis and dreaming, and when we access the REM state through hypnosis, then we're accessing it through the state of wakefulness. Okay, so people don't just access the REM state when they're asleep. Okay, and as I say, the REM sleep is quite different from normal everyday sleep, every night sleep. Okay, so if you're going into REM sleep, then it will be having an effect, whether you recall it or not. And you can sort of come around sometimes and think, where was I? But you wouldn't have been very deep. It takes a while to get into slow wave sleep. Then you become a little bit less accessible as far as suggestions are concerned. I had a guy come and see me once, and he came to see me quite early in the mornings, and I think he was a bit sleep deprived, and he would sort of sometimes dribble, and I knew he was just going into slow wave sleep. He was using me as an excuse, as a vehicle to catch up on his sleep, his sleep debt. And I suggested he come to see me later in the day, and we tried methods to improve his sleep as well, so we got more sleep at night. And then he started to actually get the benefits of hypnosis through the REM stage. Okay. Right. Hi Mark, greetings from New Zealand. What causes a bad habit that's hard to stop even though you try? Okay, well, there could be lots of things causing a bad habit. I mean, we can develop bad habits because people around us have got bad habits, because we're mimetic. there's social contagions, and if people are obese around you, you're more likely to become obese. If people get divorced around you, then you're more likely to get divorced. And depression also spreads in social networks. So it's always good with a bad habit to think, who do I surround myself with? Who am I around? Perhaps even online. But also good habits can be contagious. So if your friend loses weight, for example, gets fitter, and their friends do, and it's more likely to spread to you as well. So that's one thing. I'm not saying that we've got no autonomy, but social networks are important. And yes. And the other point that I was going to make is that sometimes a bad habit is an attempted solution to a problem. So sometimes we can look at problems as sloppy attempted solutions that then become a problem in themselves. So for example, someone who's very shy may discover alcohol at a young age, and it seems to solve a problem because now they can talk to other people, and they feel disinhibited and more confident, and maybe they can be a bit funnier and so forth. And we can see that's an attempted solution, not necessarily a consciously thought out one, but but we can also quite clearly see that habit can become a problem for the person. Okay, so what problem might the bad habit be trying to solve for the person? The bad habit of procrastination might be, as I mentioned earlier, trying to solve the problem of fear of failure. If I procrastinate, if I put it off, then maybe something will come along that means I don't have to do it, and then I won't fail, and so forth. And again, this isn't a conscious thinking. So being honest with oneself, what am I trying to get out of this? Comfort eating is a classic one. The person needs comfort; they don't need food. And but a need is, we're trying to meet a need through a way that causes us more problems. Okay, we all have a need for attention, but if I have the habit of interrupting you every time you try to speak, because I'm so desperate, I'm so hungry for attention because I'm not getting enough legitimately in my life, I'm trying to steal it in a sense, then once I start to meet that need, my need for attention in a sustainable way, then I don't have to keep interrupting you all the time. So if we look at bad habits in terms of human needs, if someone has a human need to drink because they're in the middle of the desert, they might drink that engine oil in the car that's broken down because there's no water around. Okay, it's an attempted solution. It seems like a solution. Oil is liquid, so it's a bit like water, but it's going to cause them bigger problems. Okay, so if you have a problem, what need do you think it might be trying to meet, and how can you meet that need in ways that don't cause you problems, in sort of more legitimate ways, perhaps? Okay, so there's a few thoughts on that. Another person writes, a friend of mine, I haven't got names for all these questions, a friend of mine called me this week after she lost a mutual friend through suicide, although it was 2 weeks ago. This time she was very emotional and distraught. I know she has been on an emotional roller coaster lately, as she has very low self-esteem. What concerned me was that she told me that she knew exactly how her friend felt, low self-esteem and worthless, and the only difference between him and her is that he went through with it. I was not prepared for such brutal honesty. What is the best course, I think that's meant to be, of action forward? What can I do or suggest? And it's very difficult when we are really concerned about somebody. Certainly we need to take that seriously. Suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts also spread in social networks as well. There was a town in Wales in the UK had an incredibly high suicide rate amongst young people, and it seemed to be that they were all sort of tangentially connected to each other. So I'm not suggesting again that that's the only cause for suicide, but someone having committed suicide can if someone's not altogether emotionally, sort of happy, then that can have an effect on them. And we know that famous people, if a famous person commits suicide, then the suicide rates skyrocket, in the weeks following the death of that person. So what I would suggest that you suggest is that you're very worried by this. You're there for her, and that are these thoughts or plans. Okay, we can have we could all it's an option for anybody. Most people have thought even in passing that they know they could do away with themselves. But is it a plan? I worked with a guy 20 odd years ago, and he had attempted suicide before he came to see me. And he had he'd sold his stuff. He had set a date and a time of when he was going to do it. He had put all his affairs in order. So this wasn't just suicidal ideation. It was suicidal planning. Okay. People are more likely to commit suicide when they're agitated. Okay, which may be one reason why, rather than just flat and depressed, where they have the energy to act when they're feeling impulsive. Impulsivity is a risk factor for, coupled with depression, is a risk factor for suicide, rather than just feeling very flat and demotivated. Okay, so plenty of people don't want to be here anymore, but that's not the same as actively wanting to kill yourself. Okay, there's two different things. So you could even talk to her, in this way. How is it for her? Does she just not want to be here anymore, or does she actively have planned? Has she actively thought about that she might do it? That you're really worried about this, and sort of reassure her that the cliche that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem is true, and that a huge amount of people who attempt suicide and who don't die later are absolutely relieved that it was unsuccessful. The attempt was unsuccessful, and they find meaning in life. So you need to work on her meaning. How can she get enough meaning into her life that such thoughts would be anathema to her? You need to reassure her that you're there for her. She'd be very stressed, so anything that can relax her would be useful. She's still in shock, of course, from what happened to her friend, and try to ensure that she has other support as well as you, so it's not all on you, sort of thing. But yes, I mean, this is a big subject, and I've just given you a few ideas there. But you need to look after yourself as well as her. But reassure her that you're worried about her, that you're there for her. Hopefully, ensure that other people are there for her as well. And sometimes, if someone's frightened of their own suicidal ideas, we can almost get a plan. Okay, if you start feeling like that again, what will you do? So the person has a sense of control over impulses like that. Okay, so I'll do this, or I'll phone that person, or I'll do this or the other. So having a plan. Okay. Another question. As I wasn't allowed to go to my dad's funeral and there's no grave, I have always felt in denial that he ever died. I have read the inquest, but it still didn't make the death real to me. Do you think this is detrimental or perfectly normal to forever be in denial about his death? I understand it rationally, but just don't really believe it. Do you think I would benefit from acceptance, or is this now an overvalued concept? Okay. Death is counterintuitive in some ways, isn't it? Someone can be so alive, and we can remember their voice, you can hear their voice in our minds, and we can, get a sense of their totality, their uniqueness, and so forth. And then suddenly, it's very hard for anybody, or for many people, to accept that someone is never going to be here again. So I think that is perfectly natural and normal. And I tend to think that we need these rituals as well. You know, the ritual of a funeral is important, and I think we forget how important rituals are to us in society, and we're in danger of sort of devaluing them. You know, these demarcation rituals. You know, sort of child going into adulthood, marriage. You know, I'm not saying everyone should get married, but or you know, the funeral and so forth. These demarcation periods, you know, going from one state to another are important, and formally marking those can be really valuable. Now, is there any way that you could form your own ritual around your father's passing? You know, I don't know. You know, however sort of personal it might be. You know, it doesn't have to involve anyone else necessarily. But sometimes these rituals, even if it's, I mean, I had one client who, you know, couldn't get over losing somebody, and hadn't really felt, again, like you, that they had gone. And she found that sitting on the beach, throwing pebbles in the water, and the pebbles were parts of the person, and yet the pebbles were becoming the greatest ocean of this, you know, of the water, you know. So, you know, does anyone really die, or do they become a part of a bigger reality? You know, and again, I don't want to, you know, sort of tell you what to believe, but you know, so many people feel when someone's gone that they're not really gone in a way. You still have a relationship with them because you have all your memories with them. Do I think that you need to accept it? Well, you have accepted it rationally, and I think it's going to take time to accept it or come to terms with it or process it in other ways. You know, in non-rational ways or intuitive ways, and I think that will come the longer you, of course, don't see your father physically. Then the more it's going to be accepted naturally. I don't think it's a problem unless it feels like a problem to you. You know, if it's tormenting you or upsetting you, then I don't think it's a problem. I'm not one of these people who says, "Oh, you've got to do this, or you've got to go through the process of these steps and so forth." You know. You're not delusional. You know that he's gone. You know, in that sense, but at the same time, it doesn't appear from what you've written to be causing you particular problems. So, yeah, those are my words on that. Someone asks, "Hi Mark, is there any medical evidence that hypnosis may help cure joint pain?" And that's from James. And I don't know of any evidence that joint pain can be cured through hypnosis. It might well be that we could do something about general inflammation in the body through relaxation or even suggestion. But I don't. I'll research it. I'll have a look, but I don't know about that. I mean, certainly pain can be ameliorated through hypnosis. So you know, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to work with joint pain as well through various hypnotic methods. Okay, this is from, "I seem to often wake up from a hypnosis session halfway through without any outside noise or other factor that will contribute to this. What causes this, and should I continue with the session or just stop and start it again another day?" Okay, well, I would continue with the session. I mean, sometimes people do sort of kind of come awake kind of quite dramatically, and I will just sort of suggest that they close their eyes again and go back into hypnosis where they were, and people tend to do that. Now, why does that happen? Well, I would suspect that it's because of something called the orientation response. Now, just before you start to go to sleep, or just as you're going to sleep, okay, so the first part of sleep is called dream fragments. Okay, so you don't have proper dreams as you go to sleep, but you have dream fragments. So you start to have hypnagogic experiences, whether you remember them or not afterwards, and then you gradually go into slower and slower sleep, and after about 70 to 90 minutes you'll have your first proper dream. Okay, but you're going through these stage 1, 2, 3, and 4 of sleep before that. So having dream fragments is quite common in hypnosis. Now, as you're going into hypnosis, something called the pons genicular occipital spike occurs, electrical spike occurs in the brain, coming up from the brainstem to the neocortex. And it's what happens when we're shocked or surprised by something. So you would have noticed sometimes when you're nodding off, you kind of go like that sometimes. You're on the train nodding off, and you spill your coffee, and it's like, oh, you make yourself jump, kind of thing. And that's the orientation response. It also happens sometimes before people, when people are shocked into hypnosis in stage shows. Okay, so I would imagine that that's what's happening when you sort of wake up. You're having a PGO spike going off, and it's just indicative that you're at a level of sort of dreaming or the guided dreams of hypnosis. And it often happens to people when they're quite new to hypnosis as well. With what's happening here? But it tends to lessen the more you do hypnosis. But yeah, I would just start again from where you left off. Okay, hi Mark. My question is, how effective is a self-created self-hypnosis script? As in, if I were to either read in my own voice or create and read aloud a hypnosis script to use, would this be effective for me to use toward a goal that I have? Or is it less effective to hear one's own voice whilst doing self-hypnosis? Thanks, from Karen, or Karin. Okay, Karen, well, that's a good question. I mean, if you find your own voice particularly annoying, then some people don't like hearing their own voices. But I've done this for myself, and what I've tended to do is to make a audio recording of my own voice for me, and leave it a couple of weeks, so I've sort of forgotten what's on it, and then listen to it. And the curious thing is that you can almost feel as if it's not you doing the talking, So I think it can be quite powerful, and it's a good way of practicing hypnosis as well if you start to use it for other people. It's a little bit like suck it and see, try to try it out and see if it works for you. It will work for some people to do that and not for others, and there's no hard and fast rule. But I would try that, Karen, and see how you get on. And I found it effective, and I know other people have as well. Yeah. So someone asks, what do you recommend for treating high blood pressure with hypnosis? And I presume you mean what kind of suggestions? Certainly, I've worked quite a bit with people who have white coat syndrome, whereby their blood pressure shoots up when they're having the blood pressure taken by a health professional, and I've managed to help them keep it low, and a lot of that's just relaxed rehearsal and so forth, and imagining the numbers going down, and but also working on lifestyle as well, so motivating the person to exercise, to eat right, and to do all the sort of lifestyle behaviors that contribute to a healthier blood pressure. So we need to do that as well. But yes, I mean, certainly just imagining the blood flowing better, even seeing the numbers going down to a more healthy level, seem to have a surprising result, using hypnosis. So I would try some of those if I were you. Right. Right. Someone asks, other than being in a quiet environment without distractions, is there anything else someone can do to increase the likelihood of hypnosis? Yeah, I mean, generally it helps if you're in a quiet location. I mean, occasionally I've had the misfortune to be hypnotizing somebody, and a drill starts up next door. A workman's drilling, and oh God, and sometimes you can build in something, so the more you notice that, the deeper you can go into hypnosis, which sounds a bit crazy. So we kind of use anything that happens, The more you hear that bird outside, the deeper you can go into hypnosis. We're linking one thing to another. So we can do that. We can certainly bring in anything to the hypnotic experience. I had a 15-year-old girl who was with her mother, and I was hypnotizing the girl, and she kept giggling while I was hypnotizing her. And if we give permission to the response, I suggested she keep giggling, and she giggled more and more, and she could giggle her way into hypnosis. And of course, the giggling kind of stopped because, the giggling is predicated on you shouldn't be doing it. So if someone's telling you to giggle more, it kind of deflates the whole thing. So we're giving permission. The more you notice that tapping outside, that woodpecker, the deeper and deeper you can go into hypnosis. And after a while, it could just fade into the background. And so we use whatever the environment presents to us, and we build that in. We don't pretend it's not happening. Okay. Other than that, times of day as well. We have ultradian rhythms. Every 90 to 120 minutes, we have a hemispheric shift from left hemispheric dominance to right hemispheric dominance. Our immune system works differently. We become more introspective, more daydreaming, and so forth. So after lunch, the postprandial dip, that's a good time to do self-hypnosis. Mid-morning, whenever we start to feel a bit defocused, then naturally, riding the downward wave of that dip so that we go into hypnosis more easily is another good thing to increase the likelihood of hypnosis. Someone asked, is it rare to feel the positive effects of a session kick in weeks after finishing listening to it rather than experiencing immediate benefits? That's an interesting question. And sometimes that does happen. And, people have said to me, for example, I didn't stop smoking after I saw you for a couple of days, and I suddenly woke up and I found I just couldn't smoke anymore, And I'm not sure why that is. I even treated someone for a phobia of going down escalators in the London Underground, the metro system, and she actually still felt anxious about it afterwards. This was a public demonstration, so I was a bit disappointed, but she was as well. But then she came to me on an advanced workshop, and she said it actually worked. She said, I went to the entrance of the underground and I felt anxious, and then I went in. I didn't feel anxious. Then I went in, got a ticket. I still didn't feel anxious. Then I went down the escalator, and to my amazement, I still didn't feel anxious. So it seemed to kick in later than we expected. So occasionally that does happen. There seems to be a delayed response, and I'm not quite sure. It's as though the unconscious mind is saying, I'll do this in my own time, thank you very much. Right, and got just a few more. Do you think there's a difference between the core beliefs, I am not good enough and I don't matter, or are they two sides of the same coin? Also, have you any metaphors that can clearly explain the difference between being alone and being lonely, particularly in reference to the human given psychology? Thanks, Linda. Well, I don't matter belief. Okay, some people feel that everybody else matters before they, or they're a bit of a doormat, So maybe, I don't want to say invite abuse because it sounds as if I'm, victim blaming, and but some people do invite abuse, and from sort of unscrupulous people. I'm not good enough to be, and the belief that I don't matter are really the same thing. I think it amounts to the same thing, Linda. That you don't matter because you're not good enough in some way. It's good to get specific with these ideas. Good enough for what? I know it's a popular sort of phrase. It's a bit self-helpy. I don't feel good enough, and people sometimes say it because they've heard other people say it. But it might be a genuine reflection of their self-esteem, low self-esteem. But how do we learn to value ourselves? and that can take time and, self-respect, learning in a way to treat yourself like you treat someone you loved and cared about, until you do love and care about them. Would I speak to someone else the way I speak to myself? Would I deprioritize someone else that I cared about the way I deprioritize myself? And, I mean, sometimes I'll even do this with the body, if you think about, again, self-harmer, like a smoker, they're devaluing their body in a way. And, sometimes it's not about you, it's about you. Your body's a team, and if your lungs are, they breathe a certain amount of times in a lifetime. There's a number of times your lungs will breathe, and everybody's lungs breathe a different number, okay? And your lungs are just nobly and loyally trying to fulfill that remit. There's a number of beats that every heart does in a lifetime. How many beats, So if your heart could finally have a representation, finally have freedom of speech, finally have support, what would your heart say about those cigarettes to you? Okay, what would your lungs, if they, and if you could just go inward and listen to what your heart says about those cigarettes. So you're teaching the person to value their body, their body is good enough, and to feel a collective sense that this is a team, that the fingers don't have to work against the heart by letting the cigarettes in, okay? Because the fingers rely on the heart and lungs for blood and oxygen, and yet they're betraying the heart and lungs, So what's it going to be like when the hands are numb with reluctance when it comes to betraying the heart and lungs? Can the fingers and the hand and the lungs and heart make a truce and work together and recognize each other's worth and so forth? Okay, so it's a quite unusual way of looking at things, but we can sometimes, reframe the sense of self-worth, because it's quite an abstract idea. I don't go around every day thinking I'm good enough, or I've got self-worth, and these sorts of things. These are sort of buzz phrases, but what does it actually feel like to respect your own time, for example, because your time's limited. Of course we're not, we don't live forever. What does it feel like to respect your own space, and so forth. So we have to unpick these ideas sometimes, and they are sort of buzz phrases, and they can feel meaningful, but we don't always know exactly what we're talking about. Good enough for what? Are you good enough to tie your own shoelaces? Have you ever been able to do that successfully? What exactly are we talking about here? Okay. And as to the other part of the question, have you any metaphors that can clearly explain the difference between being alone and being lonely? Well, one metaphor that comes to mind immediately is being hungry and being satiated. In both states you're not eating. Okay. One because, but in one you're suffering. You're suffering from the lack of not eating. For the other, you're not eating because you ate a nutritious, protein-filled meal 3 or 4 hours ago, and it's still sustaining you. Okay, so that would be a metaphor that just comes to mind. But I don't know how that particularly references the human given's psychology. But the human given psychology is all about meeting basic emotional needs and the tools that nature gave us to meet those needs. So we all have a need for attention, but once you've eaten enough attention, then the need doesn't have to be agreed, and that there are advantages to getting good at being alone, which doesn't mean that someone's a loser or they haven't got friends, or self-reflection is a very important thing to do. To have time to reflect. Otherwise, we're just passive victims of other people's impressions and ideas and suggestions, and we don't have time to actually analyze and think and reflect. I'm not talking about depressive rumination here, but actually calmly objectively reflecting. Do I really think that? Do I really believe what these people have been saying, and so forth? Okay, it's important for autonomy to be alone. Okay, Fortune of Solitude, Fortress of Solitude with Superman. Okay, and the second to last question: how frequently should I do the hypnosis to reprogram my brain to end my porn and masturbation addiction? I didn't see that one coming. I would do that. I would practice initially, or I say practice, listen initially every day. I think, because these tend to be frequent behaviours. I mean, some people will sort of occasionally use porn or masturbate, but generally they seem to be quite common addictions or behaviours. I don't want to pathologise it too much, although porn can be an addiction. So yeah, every day I would listen. Yeah, until it ameliorates. And finally, what are some differences between your early scripts and newer scripts? How have they changed? And I won't keep you much longer. But really, the earlier ones were perhaps less subtle, probably a bit more churned out, which is why we're updating all the earlier ones. Some of them are good, I think, and certainly effective for people. But the later ones tend to be more subtle, less didactic. The earlier ones tend to be a bit lecture filled, almost like a training program, telling you at the beginning of the script what's going on, why this is happening, which is all very well, but you can read that in other places or other stuff that we've done. For the hypnosis part, you just really want the hypnosis, and I think our latter scripts are much more, to do with getting into the hypnosis more immediately. Probably a better use of metaphor as well, and yeah, and the sleep ones sort of fade out. They don't wake you up at the end, so you can use them to go to sleep and that sort of thing. But I feel that they've improved quite sort of radically over the years. I mean, we've been doing hypnosis downloads for 21 years now. So certainly it would be strange if there had been no kind of progress or evolution in that time. Right. Okay. So as I say, if your question didn't come up, then it doesn't mean that it won't come up. And thanks a lot, and I'll see you soon.